man. Cool, man. Well, I'm excited. So we finally got it working. You want to get started?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm already recording, so I'll edit out that first part of our interview. But man, just John, a little bit about you. You're the third oldest brother, if I'm not mistaken. So you're right there in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so tell me a little bit about just what it was like growing up in the Bigler household. What was your mom and dad like? What did you do for fun? Like, give me some context as far as like what it was like growing up down there in Ojai, California.
We moved to Ojai in 1986. I was 8 years old at the time. And yeah, one of seven boys. I guess in 1986, that was six boys. The youngest wasn't born yet. You know, Obviously, in a household like that, there's constant competition, um, you know, uh, for resources, for attention, um, you know, all of it to be noticed. Um, a family of seven boys, there's um, there's never a dull moment, right? There's you know there's there's um, fights and camaraderie and everything in between. Um, we we had many adventures growing up in Ojai. We had an acre of land there. Um, I still love going back to visit. Mom still lives there. Um, we shortly after we moved there, we built a tree house, and um, we'd play various games in the backyard. Um, we also had lots of work to do. Um, it was always a constant battle with the weeds in the backyard, mowing those down every year. I remember one of the things we used to do was get like pieces of cardboard and slide down some of the hills that were covered in like oak leaves. Um, we'd ride our bikes around the neighborhood like, typical children in the 80s. We, um, our our parents, um, you know, were, I would say, pretty well. They were strict on some things and not on everything. We always had to tell them where we were going, so it wasn't like we could just leave and be gone, you know, and then just come back when we wanted. But still we spent a lot of our childhood, um, outdoors. With seven boys, sometimes the resources would be limited, and so we wouldn't always have the newest and fanciest things that some of our friends would have. Like we didn't have a Nintendo until years after Super Nintendo came out, and by the time um, by the time we got a Super Nintendo, everyone else was playing Nintendo 64, that kind of thing. Um, we you know you it's easy as a child, recognizing the things that others have that you don't. I do realize that we had a pretty blessed childhood, and even though um, you're dividing resources among seven boys, we were still a well-off family. We never struggled for having enough to eat, or for a place to live or anything like that. Um, so yeah, I feel like I had a great childhood. Raised by two parents that were present, that cared about us, loved us, um, taught us correct principles to live by. Um, I'm very grateful for all of that. So I don't know, does that paint a picture?
Yeah, no, it does, and I think the '80s, man, were like a peak time to be a kid. Like it really does. Like I watched like Stranger Things a few months back, finished up the season, and just like the bikes and the play and the exploring and like you kind of like make your own fun like as a kid. And it was before I think the world was like so aware of like the evil out there. There was no video games, there was no tablets, and it just seems like as far as like a little boy looking to like explore the world, like the '80s were a peak time to do that. So it definitely paints a picture of what it was like in Ojai, California. And I guess what were your hobbies like growing up? Like, did you do anything fun? Like I know John mentioned you worked hard to be a decent basketball player, but what were you what did you do for fun? You personally when you were growing up?
Well, I don't want to paint the picture that we were outside all the time. I played more than a healthy share of computer games when I was a kid. I wasn't I wasn't really all that focused on athletics. Actually, much more so in my adult life have I been involved and interested in athletics. I probably didn't have an interest for basketball until I was like maybe a junior in high school. Much too late to get on a high school team or anything like that. And the interest for that, really just sprung out of that's what we did as a family. So, you know, you have a family of all boys. What do you do? Well, you play basketball, right?
Yeah.
Um, I I've had a love for nature since I was a little kid, though. I can remember all the way back before we lived in Ojai, when I was like too young to be like, I think I was in kindergarten when um like my brothers would go to school, and I think I had afternoon kindergarten, or maybe it was morning. I can't remember for sure, but kindergarten was only like a half day, and I was kind of jealous of my brothers getting to go to school, and I was stuck at home. And there's one day that it was a rainy day, and I had these little galoshes. I can actually see a picture of them in my head. It's a vivid memory. They were Sesame Street galoshes, these little rain boots, and I put them on and came over to my mom and said, I want to go outside and play in the rain. And she said, okay. And so she put my raincoat on, and I went outside, and I was in the front yard. She was watching me from inside through the window, and we had this little patch of African daisies in the front yard, landscape. And I noticed there was a bunch of these European snails that were, in the flowers there. And I went and collected a whole. I took one of my rain boots off and put a bunch of them inside my rain boot, like collected them, because I thought they were so cool. Um, like they could move without having feet, and that was just fascinating to me. No legs or feet, but they could still move, and they had eyes that were on the ends of their like stalks, and if you touched the end of the stalk, it would suck back into its head. And I was just absolutely fascinated by these snails. And I was so fascinated that I had the thought that, well, someone else would be fascinated by it too. And so I ran to the next door. And I'm sure my mom was chasing me at that point because she was watching me through the window. But I made it to the neighbor's house and asked her if she wanted a snail. Like I knocked on the door, and she came to the door, and I said, "Do you want a snail?" And of course, she made a disgusted look, like, why would I want a snail? And my mom caught up to me, and she apologized to the next door neighbor, and um, that's just an example, of the genesis of who I was, because I've built a career in my adult years, as being a wildlife biologist and a botanist. And I can remember having that fascination and that curiosity that led me to become a scientist at a very young age. Um, and so when a lot of my peers were out, you know running around the neighborhood, um, you might find me turning over rocks in the backyard, seeing what different insects that I could collect in a jar.
Hmm.
So I may have been a little bit unique from my brothers, at least to some regard, to some degree in that aspect of my childhood.
So what did you have to study to get yourself to like get that kind of career? Like, what you have like a PhD, or was it like you do it like in a bachelor's, or you just gain the
Uh,
experience? What kind of was your trajectory?
yeah, I,
I
I've been asked that question a lot. Uh, it not much different than anyone else that has an interest or a passion. I just followed it in my college years. I chose a degree that I thought had the most interesting classes, and um, I knew I was interested in science, um, and biology. Um, I went to Cal Poly, California Polytechnic State University. Um, I remember looking at different degree programs and noticing that ecology didn't require calculus. Never particularly cared for math all that much, and that was one of the few masters in sciences, or I'm sorry, a bachelor's in sciences that you could get that didn't have um, a requirement for taking calculus. But the courses also attracted me. And Cal Poly was a really good school for me. Their motto is learn by doing. And in my research of what institution to attend, they sold themselves on a very field and industry based learning program where um, you know less classroom time and more field trip time in general. Um, for example, I took field botany at Cal Poly. Um, uh, One of a well-renowned professor, David Keel, was the professor at the time, and he actually wrote the key to families for the Jepson manual, which is the most commonly used dichotomous key for keying plants in California. Um, and and every Friday was an all-day field trip. We'd start at 8 a.m. and like end at 4 p.m. and we'd just go out and learn plants all day. Uh, I'll tell you what, that was a difficult class. I had a book of flashcards that was over 800 long. So I learned the scientific and the Latin name and the common name for over 800 species of plants, in a 12-week course. every time every time we would drive and we during my college years, my younger brothers were still in high school. They were playing high school football, and I was 3 hours away, and for most weekends I'd drive the 3 hours home to watch their football games. And Mackenzie, my wife, she would be reading flashcards. She'd say the common name and I'd have to say the scientific name and stuff like that. Or she showed me a picture of the plant and I'd have to identify it, say what it was. And um, so, yeah, that's, I guess, a long answer to your question, but I have a degree in ecology and systematic biology from Cal Poly. And um, I, I I was actually back in 2006 when I graduated, was thinking that I would go right back to grad school. And I had plans to get my master's degree there at Cal Poly and just continue on my education. In fact, I was so confident in that I didn't even go to the graduation ceremony because I thought, why put on the cap and gown and walk and do all that and then start school at the same place in the fall again? That didn't make sense, right? And so I didn't walk. I applied to their grad program, and because of basically because of a little bit of oversight on my part, and um, and a lot of oversight by a professor who agreed to take me on as you know as an advisor. Um, he didn't write a recommendation letter for me, and so I didn't get accepted. And the reason he didn't write me a recommendation letter is that he took a job and went elsewhere. He took a government job for the NRCS, I think up in Idaho or something. But he hadn't announced that publicly that he was taking that job, and he didn't want anyone to know that he was applying for it until he got the job. And so, I ended up not getting accepted to Cal Poly. And then I remember thinking, um, I had this feeling of relief when I got that rejection letter, and the thought settled in that I'm not starting school in the fall, and that felt great. I was like, wait a minute, that means I don't have to register for classes, um, and I never really dismissed the idea of getting a master's degree. Um, but I put it on hold, and I thought, well, maybe I should just go out there and see what jobs are available. And I applied for a job with a company called Rincon Consultants, in environmental consulting. Um, they they had an office right there in San Luis Obispo, California, and so I interviewed with them. They had a biologist position open, and they hired me, and I've been in environmental consulting ever since. I started in January of 2007, and I've my had my whole career in environmental consulting since then. Um, and several times I've thought, maybe I ought to go back from my master's, but every time I thought about it and thought about the prospect of being in school again, I've dismissed it. So at this point, I think it's probably safe to say that I won't ever go back. But I don't know. That's not for sure. Never say never, right?
Yeah, I've noticed like it seems like you were like way ahead of the curve because I saw this joke once where men that turn 30 they get really into like three hobbies: meat, World War II history, and nature. And, and I noticed it like I was like walking the other day like in the Uintas, not the other day, like a few months back when there was no snow up there. But I saw this bird and I was telling my buddy, I was like, I think that might be a yellow rumped wobbler. And he was like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" I was like, "Well, it's a bird I was reading about the other day in like this magazine. I think I saw it's like yellow butt, and I think it's a yellow rumped." And they were like, "I don't know if those are up here," but like just the fact that I was thinking about that, like I usually don't think about stuff like that until I turn 30. Like when I turn 30, I start getting into like nature and the history and stuff and our planet and so it's really interesting that like you like went that route and John told me a little bit about like how you own your own company, like an environmental um and you have to like get the term right. But what is the company that you run? Like, what is it that you do? And is it like environmental consulting? Is that what it is, or what's the right term for it?
Yeah, yeah. So the industry is environmental consulting. And a lot of people's eyes glaze over when I say that because it's not a well-known industry. The best way to describe it to the layperson, it's helping anyone that's doing development jump through the hoops of environmental compliance.
Hmm.
So, there's environmental laws that govern you know natural resources, and not just natural resources, also cultural resources. Um, so um, basically, these laws include things like the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, um, the National Environmental Policy Act. Um, there's several of these, we call them environmental laws, that basically regulate what we can and cannot do with respect to the environment. And an environmental consulting firm basically helps you if you're planning some kind of development to be able to comply with these laws. Um, in in Vernal, Utah, we're in what they call the Uinta Basin, and that's the energy hub of Utah. So the core industry out here is oil and gas. Uh, Oil and gas development is kind of the driving force for our economy out here. So um, most of my clients are oil and gas operators that have, um, in many cases, leased land from the federal government and from the state of Utah. And so, because they don't own that land, typically it's like BLM, Bureau of Land Management land. Um, the BLM has regulations on what they can and cannot do and how they do it, in order to comply with their lease. Um, and so A lot of times before they build a new well pad or a pipeline or a road to that well pad, they have to send scientists out there to do a pre-construction study to see what's there, what wildlife will be impacted, what rare plants would be impacted, what cultural resources could be impacted by that development. So our company would go out and do the studies and prepare reports that would then be submitted to our client, who would then submit them to a government agency that would review and either approve or approve with stipulations that proposed development. So my staff and I would go out there and walk transects for federally listed plants, plants that would be on the endangered species list. We might do a survey for raptor nests, like hawk, eagle, and owl nests. Um, and Because we're a private company, we're not policing our clients. We're assisting them in compliance. So it kind of puts us at an interesting position, kind of between the government and industry. I feel like we kind of have an emissarial role. A lot of times I find myself explaining to my clients what the government wants, and what their objective is, in order to approve, what they want from them in order to approve, their permit. And then on the other end, I end up trying to explain to uh, government sometimes, government regulators and land managers, hey, this is what our client is trying to accomplish with this development. Um, help help me help you, as far as the compliance side. What do you need to see from them? And there's been many times where I've seen that they just don't speak each other's language, and I can be, kind of an emissary to help smooth you know, that communication. So it's kind of an interesting role that I play in my industry. Again, it all stems from my passion, right? Uh, As a biologist and a botanist, wildlife biologist and a botanist, I have the interest in those resources. But I've also found that I have a real get a satisfaction out of serving clients, and helping them, meet their needs. Sometimes I'm asked if I'm an environmentalist. Um, and to answer that question, I basically have to say, well, yes, I am, because I do care about the environment, but that's not what I'm paid to do. So my job isn't an environmentalist. In fact, if anything, could be considered the opposite of that, because um, I earn my paycheck from those that are doing development, those that are impacting the environment. Um, so, you know, somebody that might be a paid environmentalist might be somebody that works for like an organization like Greenpeace or Sierra Club, a nonprofit, or Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, an organization that's a nonprofit that is trying to push back on, you know, development and harms to the environment. Those organizations have a role to play, but that's not my role. If that I don't know if that makes sense. And so, while I might be an environmentalist personally, that's completely separate from the work that I do. Um, I, I worked for, um, probably close to 10 years, um, as a as as an employee of environmental consulting firms. Um, Back in 2017, I was laid off. I was actually laid off twice within a year. I worked for an environmental consulting firm for 6 years, and then they laid me off. And then I worked for an engineering firm for almost a year after that. And at that point, I realized, you know what? I don't really need an employer anymore. I know how to do this. Um, I wasn't sure if I had the means, but basically what I told my employer when they went to lay me off is I said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Uh, I have all the means and I have all the connections to do this without you." Um, and they called my bluff and laid me off anyways. And most of the clientele that I've had over the 8 years in business stemmed from the connections that I had as an employee. So I basically continued to serve the same clients and just created my own environmental consulting company myself and continued to do the same kind of studies, um, just without having to have an employer, um, take 2/3 of, the profits of what my work produced and pay me 1/3 of it. So, yeah, I feel very blessed to be in the position that I am with my career. Um, like I said, 8 years in business now. I feel like it's really helped Mackenzie and I grow together because she helps with the business. She does a lot of the accounting side and the HR side and helps with the business. Um, it's obviously, I don't know, to most people very satisfying when you figure out that you don't need an employer, that you could do it on your own. So
So when you talk about like being an environmentalist, like what does that mean? Like I guess like for these videos, it may be seen by like your kids and your kids' kids and your kids' kids. Um, when you say environmentalist, like what when you label yourself that way, what does that mean in layman's terms for those that maybe listen to this podcast at some point in the
okay,
future?
yeah, that's a good question. Um, I honestly feel like I, I I question anyone who wouldn't identify as an environmentalist, based on the
100%.
definition that I give. And an environmentalist to me is somebody that cares enough about the planet and about their local resources that they don't want to see them managed in an irresponsible way. They don't want to see their water, you know, polluted to the point where it makes it unsafe to drink. They don't want to see their air unsafe to breathe without, children developing asthma and other, health effects. You know, we have, one planet, and if we, um, if we mismanage our resources, some of them are not easily renewed, you know, um, and so we have to live with the consequences of our choices and what we support and what we don't. And as citizens in a free, democratic society, not only do we have the right, but I think we have the obligation to call things out when they are wrong. When we see things that are wrong, and um, and that and doing that makes you an environmentalist. Um, and obviously, there's different levels and different, uh, you know there's different levels of commitment to various causes, um, and the pendulum can swing both ways, right? Like, um, I think most people agree that, um, in order for us, to to have a productive society, that we have to allow for some impact, to our environment, right? Some level of pollution, some level of destruction of habitat of species and things like that. It's impossible to not have a footprint, right? Um, and so, you know uh, there's there can be activism that is, in most people, in some people's minds, over the top, like, for example, you know um, violence against, anyone doing development, or, you know trying to interfere, with industry in a way that is, like violent or unreasonable. Trying to find the right words, but basically, you know environmentalism, I think, sometimes can get a bad name because we read the newspapers and we see somebody chaining themselves to a tree, you know, um, because they don't want to see that tree cut down when somebody that's doing development has done all their due diligence and done the best they can to avoid cutting down as many trees as possible, but there ends up having to be one tree to cut down. um, and people see that as unreasonable. That can give all environmentalists a bad name, and almost people have a knee-jerk reaction to the actual name of an environmentalist, when in reality I think it would be crazy for anyone to not be an environmentalist, because you live in the environment, right? And so why would you not care about the environment that you live? So
It's awesome. That's a great definition. Yeah, I'll second that with you. I I watched this documentary at Sundance. It's called The Lake, and it talks about the effects that like the dying Great Salt Lake might have like on the state of Utah and the West in general. And honestly, like,
Mhm.
it scared the crap out of me, bro. And like you see like the snowpack like here in the whole West right now. Like I drove through Wyoming yesterday. There's still no snow there, and as someone who really enjoys like hiking in your neck of the woods in the Uinta wilderness with full lakes, pollution-free air, and free of forest fires, like the snowpack has such a massive impact on that, and honestly, like makes me nervous. It makes me nervous. Like you see, just the environment, like when the environment changes, like it changes and it's scary and it has these big effects. And yeah, I just think that's a beautiful way to describe it. The way you describe it is just, do you like clean water? Do you like clean air? Like do you like these beautiful places that we enjoy? Then you're an
And
environmentalist. Like let's not push the label even further than that.
yeah, I mean, I realize I'm not the most articulate person, but I feel like that still doesn't mean that I shouldn't have a voice. And I think that we're really doing our society a disfavor if we don't, at least try to have a voice for things that we see. And as somebody that works in the environmental sector, I do feel like um, I have a better view than a lot of other people, and just in general in society, you know, and so I do kind of feel like I have more of a responsibility than your average person to be an environmentalist because of my career and the things that I'm exposed to, the things that I see. Um, I do feel like the oil and gas industry maybe gets a little bit more of a bad rap um, than its fair share, because it is one of those very visible type of industries. Um, there are a lot of industries that I think should be under more environmental scrutiny, that aren't. And that doesn't mean that that there's not problems with oil and gas development. There sure are. But not all players are equal. I've seen some oil and gas operators, really extend themselves, as far as the responsibility that they take to the environment. And I've seen it all, all across the spectrum. And so I don't think it's fair to label any company that's an oil and gas developer as being an enemy to the environment. Um, some are and some aren't. They're not all equal players.
Yeah.
And I think the focus should be more on what they're actually doing or not doing with respect to the environment than on what industry they're in. Um, you know, so but
Fascinating. Okay, so changing the direction a little bit. You talked about just what it means to be an environmentalist, your career at this current moment. We're recording this on Sunday, February 15th at 10:15 a.m. on 26th. I think 26th is the year. Take me back. You mentioned Mackenzie a few times. How did you meet your wife? It definitely wasn't a Tinder date, I assume, because it's been a while back. But how did you meet Mackenzie?
um, you know, Mackenzie is the best thing about me. So, and I don't know how long you want this interview to be. I mean, we could spend the rest of the time talking about her, and I would be happy with that. You know, she's pretty special. I met Mackenzie in 2002. Um, and people always ask how we met because I'm from California, she's from Utah. Um, so she had a roommate at BYU. Her name is Milena Jones, or that's her maiden name. Her married name is escaping me at the moment. I'm sorry. But anyway, she introduced us. She brought Mackenzie to California when they were on spring break from BYU. They were they were roommates and stand partners in the BYU Philharmonic Orchestra. They both played the bass in the BYU orchestra. Um, and so that's how they became roommates. And so Milena's father, um, Greg Jones, was actually serving in the Ventura, California stake presidency in the church with my dad, um, Bert Bigler. So they were both counselors to the same stake president, and and so we knew each other. I actually knew Milena from childhood. And the thing about Milena is she was masterful at manipulating situations so that she could have access to to interact with the people that she wanted to interact with. And I didn't know this at the time, but she had a crush on my best buddy, Ben Young. And she wanted to find a way to meet him. And so she called me up and said she's home for spring break and she wanted to get together. And I said, sure, that's great. And she also said, I have a beautiful friend. Her name is Mackenzie. Can I bring her along and can we do a double date? And so I agreed to that. And um, I thought she wanted to go out with me. And I accepted to go on a date with her, and my friend would be on a date with her friend. So we first time we went out to lunch, and that was great. And they said during that lunch that they wanted to go to Disneyland, and that they thought it would be really cool if we went with them. I and it was like in 2 days, and we were both working at the time, but I think they went on a Saturday. We didn't have work, and we said, okay, yeah, what the heck, let's go. And so we went to Disneyland, and I don't know at what point during the day that this started happening, but it wasn't until like midday that I noticed that my date was holding hands with my buddy.
Dude, what the heck?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Um and then I was like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And it was midway through the day that we just changed dates. So so my buddy was on a date with my friend Milena, and I was on a date with her friend Mackenzie, which I learned later was Milena's plan all along because she had this crush on my buddy.
Hmm.
And um, anyway, so her and my buddy had this fling, and I mean, yeah, I mean they were flinging by the end of that day there at Disneyland. Um, we made it home the next day, and I actually enjoyed Mackenzie's company quite a bit. Um, and so much so that once we got back afterwards, I invited her on a date and didn't invite Ben and Milena.
Nice.
um, yeah, and and it hit off. We hit it off after that. Um, and then she went back. We had we had our first romantic interactions in that week that they were there for spring break, and then she went back to BYU in Utah, um, and I continued my studies. I was actually at Ventura Community College back then, um, finishing up my associate's degree. Um, and later that summer, I had a busy summer, but I found a way to go out and visit her. in Provo. My brother Don was actually a student at BYU at the time. So I slept on his couch for a night and was able to see Mackenzie again. Uh, we actually floated the Provo River on inner tubes, and that was when Katie was pregnant. Like she was like 8 months pregnant with Kirsty, our niece, at the time, and the four of us floated on inner tubes down the Provo River. Super fun. Um, and then it just kind of became a thing where Mackenzie and I stayed in touch. We'd call each other from time to time, email each other. Um, we got together during Christmas break, um, until, gosh, it would have been uh, a whole year, 2 years that we had a distance relationship going on, where we both saw other people. It wasn't an exclusive relationship. We just continued to talk to each other, a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, not usually long phone calls. Neither of us have ever been ones that like to talk on the phone for like hours at a time. But we periodically talk to each other. Um, Both of us, were real shy about talking about any of the others that we dated at the time, because we still had a romantic interest in each other. And it was kind of a don't ask, don't tell thing, like don't talk about the guys that you go out with, and I'm not going to talk about the girls that I go out with, and we'll just kind of see where this goes. And things like this you don't really see coming, right? I didn't, and I was falling in love with her even though she wasn't there with me. And I think a lot of that has to do with maybe I was still a bit immature in my dating at that point, and still was over focused on what women looked like, you know, in evaluating a potential mate, right? And her not being there all the time helped me to develop an emotional connection that maybe I wasn't able to with women that I had dated for more of a sexual attraction reason, you know, and so we kind of developed that bond with each other. And so fast forward to, like, I think it was like December of 2003, where I'm actually now a student at Cal Poly. um I had finished my associate degree and moved up to San Luis Obispo to attend school there. And she and I were still communicating, but she basically wrote me a letter and she said, um, my feelings for you have changed to the point where I need to either break it off with you, um, or know, where this is going. And so basically she wrote me a letter to break up with me. And and it was yeah, and it was a hard thing for me because, we had made no promises to each other at that point. So how can we be breaking up when we were never officially a couple, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I was kidding myself because I was in love with her at that point. I was, but I was in denial about it. I was basically saying, look, I'm a student at Cal Poly. She's a student at BYU. I'll finish my education and then worry about, things like marriage and family after I have my education, you know? And I was just stuck in that mindset of no, education, that's my focus. Even though I had the love of my life, that was slipping through my fingers. And she kind of had to snap me out of that. She had to tell me, look, I'm moving on, and I don't want you to continue to call me and email me anymore because I need to move on. And I need to, I basically need to get on with my life. And I can't do that if you're still sending me letters telling me how much you like me and want to be with me and stuff like that. And so um, I spent a whole day without eating or sleeping, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And after about, I don't know, it was like 24 hours, I just decided to jump in my car, drop everything, and drive to Utah. And so I drove to Utah and basically got in touch with one of her roommates, and I said, I want you to set up a blind date for her with me, and I'll just be there at the restaurant. And of course, she was totally blown away that I was there. Um, and basically told her that I choose us. And um, you know, and so I made arrangements to take like I guess you would call it a sabbatical from my education, and I moved to Provo and just basically did odd jobs and worked while she finished her degree. 6 months later, I proposed to her, and a couple months or 3 months after that, we were married in August of 2004, right after she graduated. So she graduated, and we got married the day after her graduation.
So you're coming up on 22 years of marriage.
Yeah, yeah.
Dude, that's cool,
So
man.
yeah, our honeymoon was basically our move to California. So she packed up all of her belongings. I packed up all of our belongings. Um, my belongings, most of them were sent, in a moving truck to California, while Mackenzie and I drove her car um, through Lake Tahoe area, spent a couple days there, went to San Francisco, and then came down the coast, the Big Sur coast, and then we went to Disneyland again to kind of celebrate the genesis of our relationship. And um, we, uh, we we have three amazing children as a result. We feel so blessed. I don't know how we ended up with the children that we do. They get along so well with each other, and so we have two boys and a girl. Our oldest Samuel um, he's 17, a junior in high school. His younger brother Quinn is 15, a freshman in high school, and our Lila is 12, and she's in sixth grade at Uinta Middle School.
All right, so your kids. Tell me about your kids.
Um, so Samuel is, like I said, he's a junior in high school. Um, he's he's very unique. I, I kind of describe him as kind of like an old soul. He's very unique from his peers. So like ever since a young age, he's never been one to stay up late, um, and doesn't sleep in. So um, you know, he's got like two bedtimes and two wake up times. He'll either go to bed at 8:30 and get up at 5, or he'll go to bed at 10 and wake up at 7. And those are like his two schedules. And he's like he's so rigid on that. And there's been some variety of, you know, changes with that, but it kind of describes a little bit, how who he is. He's just unique. He doesn't care a lot about um, like other people's perception of him. Like most teenagers are so overly concerned about their image, and the way they're perceived by their peers. Um, he's generally a friendly person and seeks out those that he feels like they need friendship and interaction. So, for example, every day he has lunch with an autistic boy, and I don't think that that boy would have any friends if Samuel wasn't his friend. And that's the only thing that they ever do together. They don't hang out outside of work, or I'm sorry, outside of school or anything. They just have lunch together on a daily basis. Um, and we tried Samuel in so many different sports when he was a little guy. Coach pitch, baseball, wrestling, soccer. He the only one that he said that he enjoyed was soccer. He was a pretty good defender in soccer. Hated to play forward. Every time I play him at forward, he'd say, "Dad, I'm a defender," and I'm like, "Okay, but I'm your coach, and I'm putting you in as forward, so do your best." And he would. Um, there was one year that we won the championship in AYSO soccer, and we had a game where we won. I think it was like 12-2, and I had a situation where um, my better athletes were going to just run the table, and run the score up. And so anytime any of my athletes would score a goal, I would move them to defender and move someone else to forward. I got to the point where it was just Samuel and one other boy that hadn't scored a goal. And those two, I played them at forward for like almost the whole second half of the game. And they shot a few times, but never ended up making a goal. Um, and and Samuel was so frustrated. He's like, "Dad, I'm not a forward," and he would, say, "Put me back as defender," and I said, "I will as soon as you score a goal." Um, but he never said he loved soccer. Um, the first time that he ever said he loved a sport, we tried him in the local club age group swim team. They're called Vernal Vipers. And gosh, this was years ago. And he came home after, I don't know if it was after the first practice or after the first meet, and said, "I love swimming." And he had never said that about a sport before. And so we knew that we had found his thing at that point. And ever since, he's been in swim. He graduated from the Vernal Vipers to Uinta High School swim, when he was a freshman. And it just so happened at that point, when he was an incoming freshman, that the coach for Uinta High School swim team of like 17 or 18 years stepped down, and there was a vacancy. And I thought, oh, this is a long shot. I doubt I could do this and run a business at the same time. But just for fun, I'll throw my name in the hat and apply to be the coach. And maybe I won't get hired as the head coach, but I'll have a good interview and they'll recommend me as an assistant coach for whoever they hire. Well, as it turned out, nobody else applied for the job. So I became the Uinta High School swim head coach. And I felt grossly inadequate at that time because I had no real swim coach experience. I did 2 years of swim team in high school, my junior and senior year. And it was really only because my high school wouldn't grant PE credit for marching band. Um, that was the reason I did it junior year. And I enjoyed it so much my junior year that I decided that I wanted to do it again my senior year. So, um, and and I didn't want to have to take PE because I wanted an extra elective, right? Like I was taking band and I also wanted to take like Spanish and so I ended up in swimming that way. Swimming came naturally for me. I always kind of regretted that I didn't start swimming younger because I actually excelled quite a bit for the 2 years that I was in there, um, and did pretty well at it. Um, and so it just kind of came naturally for me. Um, and I love the sport as well. In fact, I mentioned that I didn't really get into athletics until my adult years. I in my adult years, I've been drawn to endurance sports, and I've done several triathlons. Um, I've done I've done a full marathon. Um, I I actually even did a half Ironman. I don't know if you're familiar with Ironman. Um, so a half Ironman would be a 1.2 mile swim, followed by a 56-mile bike and a 13-mile run. That took me just under 6 hours to do that. Um, that was, I think, back in like 2019 or somewhere in there that I did that. This last year, I was able to find a distance swim race where I swam the width of Bear Lake, 6.4 mile swim. It took me just over 4 hours. Um, so getting back to Samuel, and coaching. So, coaching has we just finished. We went to state this weekend actually. I just finished my third year as a head coach of Uinta High Swim. Um, it really is a blessing that I'm able to keep the business going and have a full-time job half of the year. Swimming is the longest of all of the high school sports. We start the 1st of October and end Valentine's Day. So it's a really long season. Um, and it's, 2 hours of practice every weekday, 5 days a week. So 10 hours at the pool at practice. But that's just scraping the surface of the time that it takes. Event entries and planning events and managing the budget and purchasing uniform and equipment, and I mean it is a full-time job. It's a 40-hour a week um, job, full-time job for 6 months of the year for me, and um, and pays probably less than 5% of my income. So I spend about 80% of my daylight hours for 6 months out of the year on less than 5% of my income. So it's a huge sacrifice. Um, that said, I love it. I love these kids. I'm I'm saying goodbye to 3-year seniors at this point, and they're kind of like kids to me. Like I have ownership of them. I love coaching. I really do. I love seeing the progression that they make. Encouraging them to chase their goals, to come up with ambitious goals. I mentioned my involvement in triathlon. I actually had James Lawrence, a very popular guy on social media. He's known as Iron Cowboy. He's from Orem, Utah. I was able, with the help of some of my connections, to get him to come to Vernal and speak to Uinta High School at the start of our season. Um, I really feel it made a big difference. He's a great motivational speaker, and we got him to come speak for a fraction of the cost. Um, but anyway, so yeah, so Samuel, his passion is swimming. He's got one more year of it, and I'm committed to one more year coaching him. Who knows after that? Um, it is a huge sacrifice, so I might not continue to coach after he graduates. Um, let's move on to my son Quinn. So Quinn, he's 15. He's a freshman in high school. He just got his learner's permit. He's asking to drive any chance that we have. Um, he's already looking at cars that he wants to buy, and I'm like, whoa, pump the brakes, buddy. Like you don't even have a license yet. um, it, Even though Samuel is bigger, Quinn is taller than his older brother. At 6'2", he's 2 inches taller than his dad. At 15 years old, um, I coached him in soccer and rec league basketball. I really thought that he was going to take to basketball, and he has. But unfortunately, he didn't make the school team. Um, and he's actually been drawn to running, and so he did cross country as a freshman, and is now just starting the track season. Um, so it's fun to watch him progress in that regard. Um, Quinn is more like a traditional teenager than his brother, but he still is pretty unique. Um, he doesn't like having a regular bedtime and doesn't like to get up in the morning like your average teenager. Um, he But Quinn has such a compassionate heart. That's the thing that I love the most about him. He tends to be a social epicenter for his peers, the one that is a good listener, that that they will go to with their problems. He's so inclusive, like just tries to um, you know he invites his friends to come to him to come with him to youth activities and stuff like that. Yeah, what else can I say? Um, he's just such a caring individual. Um, uh, he can be a hard worker if you get him behind the cause. If you can get him to buy into whatever the reason is for the work, he can be a real hard worker. A little harder if not, if he hasn't bought into the cause, not as much. But um, as compared to his older brother, who is more of a people pleaser and will work hard just because I want him to and I asked him to, and doesn't need a reason why. So they're motivated by different things, but neither of those things are bad. It's just kind of the difference between them. Um, so that's Quinn. Lila, she's 12. You know, she walks by me in the hall, and she's grown so fast. I'm like, who is this woman walking through our house? She's starting to look like a woman, and she's only 12, and it it messes with my brain every time. Um, she's a beautiful young lady. She she is also kind of one that tends to be a social atmosphere, epicenter for her peers, and kind of attracts those that are needing friendship, and she's pretty inclusive. Um, she's into music, like singing, and then she also is very much into soccer, and she swims as well. So she's on the Viper swim team and has excelled quite a bit. She's doing really well. Her times are about the fastest of any of the girls on the team her age. So kind of excited about the future for her. She's an extremely intelligent, sometimes more intelligent than I like. She definitely has the power to manipulate me if she wants to, um, but she usually doesn't. Um, yeah, she she she's I would say probably, um, if we do have conflict in the home, probably involved in it sometimes, but not because malicious. I think it's just her personality. To be a bit of a teaser and push buttons. Um, but we love her, and yeah. So I mean, being a dad to me is the best title, over coach or biologist or business owner or any of those things. The title of dad is the most special to me, and my family pretty much drives, you know, the decisions that I make. They're my reason for every choice. So
Seems like you got a beautiful life that you built. Found a nice home, nice kids, great wife, and no, I just appreciate you sharing just the beautiful life that you created. I do have some the questions for you though, so that like your posterity can get to know you a little bit more. Apart from like the stuff that we talked about. So are you good if I do some rapid fire questions real quick?
sure. So just kind of timeline. We have church at noon. It's 10:45 now. I'll need like a half hour to like get ready for church. So I'd say
Perfect.
another half hour at the most, and we'll need to cut it. So
Cool. I think I've got 15 minutes, and so I've got you.
okay, sounds good.
Cool. All right, man. Favorite movie? What is it?
I struggle with that one because I have a long list. I
List them.
I
You can list all of them.
Yeah. I really love The Princess Bride. It's such good writing. Like
Yeah.
that movie is such a good story. Billy Crystal, he's so funny in that movie. Andre the Giant, just such a good movie. I also love a sports movie. I love The Sandlot. Um,
Oh yeah,
such a
dude.
classic. Um,
That's a classic, dude.
yeah, so good. That movie, is like I Benny the Jet Rodriguez just seems to be like the best, like peer mentor that any boy could have,
Yep.
as a buddy. Um, I'm trying to think some other ones. Uh, when I was a kid, I loved the movie Big with Tom Hanks. That movie was awesome. Um, I love the whole Star Wars saga. Of course, my favorite being the original trilogy. I'm not a purist though. I like the new stuff too. I mean, even episode one, you know, minus Jar Jar Binks. um, I mean, I definitely think like the best martial arts and combat is as episode one.
For sure.
So um, John's talked about the Lord of the Rings, extensively in your interviews. I love those movies. It's really hard to get to watch those because nobody wants to sit that long for a movie. So you
You're
know,
missing out.
maybe Samuel will watch them with me. He's probably the only one in the family that would want to sit down for a 3 hour movie of that. But yeah, so um, there's probably some that I'm forgetting. I love Dumb and Dumber. People think that that's such a terrible movie, but I loved it. Um,
Nah, dude, it's a classic too.
um, yeah, not and then Napoleon Dynamite. I love that one too. Great movie.
John mentioned that your favorite band is They Might Be Giants.
That's correct. Yeah, I've
Okay.
been a loyal fan since I was exposed to them by my best buddy Ben Young. It, wa- it, Gosh, that would have been like right around 1990 or so, in junior high when he had exposed me to them. Um, they it's hard to explain why you're attracted to your favorite band. For me, it is. I mean, the lyrics, the melodies. These guys are so clever in their writing, and they're so unique. Like you can't really put them into a genre. Like they don't fit in any genre. They're so unique. Um, I actually took Quinn. I bought 2 tickets to go see them in Denver without really knowing who I would take with me. I knew I didn't want to go by myself, and I knew I wanted to go, so I bought tickets. And last summer, I took Quinn for his 15th birthday, and we did a road trip out to Denver. Um, and oh man, it's a core memory. I had so much fun. Him and I, and he's kind of taken the traction of of being a fan as well. And
Yeah.
we listened to their albums, the whole 6 hour drive out and the 6 hour drive back. Watched, listened to just about everything that they've ever made. And that's a lot, right? Because these guys have been touring regularly since like 1985. And so they're in their they got to be mid to late 60s now, and they still tour every year. They're so cool.
Dude, that's
Yeah.
cool, man.
Yep.
All right, man. Last question. You mentioned you're going to church. John mentioned you served your mission in Colorado, right? Colorado.
Yep.
So
The
what is
Colorado
the
Denver South Mission.
nice? What is I guess for the last little bit, the last couple minutes of the interview, what role does faith play in your life? Does it play faith? I'm assuming it does because you're going to church, so I imagine it still plays a faith. It has plays a role in your life, but go into your faith a little bit.
Well, my my role, the role religion has, I think, it takes a back seat to the role that faith and a relationship with Jesus Christ has in my life. I, I am involved in church, and I have a church calling. I teach primary. I teach like 6 and 7 year olds on Sundays. Um, yeah, I um, I enjoy that. It's fun. I um, but my faith is really what guides my life, not my involvement in church, right? So um, I um, I I gosh, it's hard to put it into words. But everything I have is because of my Savior, and um, through my life, when I was younger, I used to think there was coincidences that happened, and I don't really believe that there are coincidences. I don't think that. things just happen. I think that we have a loving Father in heaven that is all powerful, and He influences people um, to to provide opportunities for us to learn and grow. And sometimes that even means putting things in our life that are traumatic, like the loss of loved ones when they're young, um, and having difficulty, conflict in your life. I feel that God allows that to happen because that's the only way that we can fully grow is through experience. There's no level of development that happens without diversity or adversity, right? Like we 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 become who we are through our experience.
Hmm.
And so I think our loving Father in heaven provides those experiences, those opportunities for growth for us. And the beauty of God's plan is that He's provided a Savior for us. And when we make mistakes, um, Jesus Christ has paid the penalty for those mistakes. He's paid the price for our sins. And if we accept Him into our heart and allow Him to guide our lives, we can repent and be forgiven of our sins, and therefore achieve perfection, even though we are imperfect beings. Through a lifetime of striving to be like Him and follow His example. So yeah, I I think that is um, a, a guiding print. My faith is a guiding light for me and how I interact in life. I feel like God puts people in our lives for a reason. And so one of the things that I try to do on a regular basis is ask, why has God put this person in my life? What am I supposed to learn from them? What am I supposed to teach them? How does the Lord expect me to help this person along their way and do His work, to be an instrument in His hands? So, that's kind of you know, my faith, my religious principles. Um, I think that because Mackenzie and I both have a strong faith in Christ, it draws us together. It's one of the reasons it helps our relationship to succeed. Um, the way I describe it is, if you describe a location to, like if you're in a dark place and you're trying to find another person, could maybe hear each other and try to walk towards each other, and but might walk past each other. But if you put a light in a room and say you walk to that light and I walk to that light, where do you end up? Together, right? And so God is that light for us. So we walk together towards that light, and it brings us together and helps our relationship to succeed. So
Dang, man. Dude, that's beautiful, man. I think that's a good last thought for your future posterity that this video is intended for. But like, let's say last question. Hypothetically, your great grandkid listening to this sometime in the future, when the planet has been saved, everything is all good. What?
Sarah Connor was saved and the machines didn't take over,
Well,
or
yeah,
the machines did take over, and this is for the machines that now rule us.
yeah. It's definitely. I think it's probably definitely gonna be the latter. Probably definitely be the latter. The AI centers have sucked up all our water, and it is now just an AI driven world. But in the
Uh-huh.
case there is a survivor, what would you want your posterity to take from your life? Like, what is something that your last message to them, the most important thing that you've learned? What do you hope that they retain from your life and continue to live that through your legacy?
Yeah, gosh, what a loaded question. That's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Um, I want to, I guess, share something that my father said to me the last time we spoke. So he was in the hospital um, talking to me after getting the news that the cancer had spread to the point where they knew he was going to die. And he talked to me about, um, like the secret for happiness in life. Um, how do we find happiness? How do we have continual joy in life? And he said that the secret is shifting the focus from yourself to others. When you're focused on others, you're not thinking about the things that are wrong, or the things that you don't have, the things that you wish you had in life. You're focused on what you can do for others, the joy that you can bring to others, the service that you can be to others. That's the secret. That's the secret to having a happy and fulfilling life, is maintaining that focus on others. And if you keep that focus on others, then it just leads to happiness, because you're bringing happiness to others, and it's contagious, and you'll feel it. So that's what I'd like them to remember that I tried to do with my life. And I know that, the record of my life will show that I was far from perfect, and I made some mistakes in life. Um, but I have tried to govern my life by what can I do for others? What can I do for the people in my life that God has placed there? How can I make a difference in their life?